The 2026 Formula One season has officially begun, and the first day of practice at the Melbourne Grand Prix circuit has already revealed some shocking early trends. Ferrari looks incredibly quick over a single lap. Mercedes appears dangerously strong on long runs. McLaren is quietly right in the fight. And then there's Aston Martin, whose situation has quickly turned into one of the biggest embarrassments we've seen in modern Formula One. From battery failures and engine chaos to the completely new energy deployment era of F1, the first practice sessions of the Australian Grand Prix may have already given us a glimpse of how this season could unfold. But the real question is this: who actually looks like the team to beat in 2026? Before we dive into everything that happened on day one in Melbourne, make sure to subscribe to F1 Grid and drop a like on the video, because throughout the entire 2026 season, we'll be breaking down every race weekend with detailed analysis just like this. Now let's start with what might be the biggest story of the entire day. For Aston Martin, the 2026 season has started in the worst possible way. The team arrived in Melbourne already facing serious concerns about reliability, but the situation appears to be even worse than many expected. According to team leadership, Aston Martin reportedly arrived at the Australian Grand Prix with 4 batteries available for the race weekend. But after issues during testing and practice running, only 2 of those batteries remain operational, and both of them are already installed in the 2 cars. That means if either battery fails during the weekend, that car simply cannot run anymore. For a modern Formula One team competing at the highest level, this kind of situation is almost unimaginable. It raises serious questions about how the Aston Martin-Honda partnership prepared for the new power unit era. Naturally, this situation has also started to frustrate Fernando Alonso. The 2-time world champion made it clear that while he is focused on driving, the lack of spare parts from the power unit supplier is extremely concerning. His argument is simple: when a manufacturer supplies multiple teams, like Mercedes does, they must produce a large number of engines and components. But Honda is currently supplying only Aston Martin, so logically, there should be no shortage of spare parts. Yet Aston Martin now finds itself in a position where even finishing the race weekend could become a challenge. And that's not the kind of start any team wants in a brand new regulation era. But when you look deeper into the situation, the issue might be more complicated than just a lack of parts. When Honda left Formula One in 2021, much of the original staff that worked on the championship-winning Red Bull engines moved on to other projects. Some joined other motorsport programs, some joined different engineering industries. And according to reports, when Honda returned to work on the new 2026 power units, only about 30% of the original staff remained. That means the current engine program has been built largely with a completely new team. In an era where power units are more complex than ever, that is a massive challenge. However, Aston Martin also carries responsibility for this situation. The team made the strategic decision to leave Mercedes Power and become a works team with Honda. That decision made sense in theory. Works partnerships often provide a competitive advantage because the engine and chassis can be developed together. But according to reports, Aston Martin leadership only visited Honda's development program late last year, long after the partnership had already been announced. By the time concerns started to appear, it may have already been too late to correct the course. And now, at the very start of the 2026 season, Aston Martin is dealing with the consequences. While Aston Martin struggles with reliability, the rest of the grid is learning how to manage something entirely new. The 2026 power unit regulations have changed the way Formula One cars deploy energy. Drivers and teams are now constantly managing how they use power between the internal combustion engine and the electrical system. This has created a concept many engineers are now calling superclipping. Instead of simply using all available power for speed, teams are sometimes deliberately sacrificing performance in certain corners so they can recharge energy for the next straight. In other words, drivers are not always pushing the car to its maximum grip. Sometimes they're actually driving slower on purpose to manage the battery. And that has created some very unusual data patterns during practice sessions.
When analysts looked at the telemetry from day one in Melbourne, something unusual appeared. In certain corners, drivers were entering much faster than their rivals, but just a few seconds later on the following straight, the situation would completely reverse. One car might have a huge speed advantage in one section, only to lose that advantage in the next. This is happening because every team is experimenting with different energy deployment strategies. Some teams prefer to deploy more electrical power earlier in the lap. Others prefer to save it for longer straights. Right now, nobody seems to have fully mastered the system, and that's why the first few races of the season could be extremely unpredictable. In terms of pure speed, Ferrari looked extremely competitive during the practice sessions. The car appears to have very strong performance over a single lap. Lewis Hamilton is now driving for Ferrari, showed encouraging pace early in the sessions, and at certain points during practice, Ferrari even looked like a potential contender for pole position. However, the long-run data tells a slightly different story. When teams switched to longer stints in race simulations, Mercedes suddenly became the team to watch. George Russell and rookie teammate Kimi Antonelli both delivered incredibly consistent lap times during their race runs. In fact, their pace over multiple laps appeared stronger than almost anyone else. This suggests that Mercedes may have a significant advantage when it comes to race pace and tire management. And in Formula One, that often matters more than outright qualifying speed. Another team that should not be ignored is McLaren. Oscar Piastri ended the day with one of the fastest laps of the session. Although the team did not show their full hand during long runs, their single lap pace suggests they are firmly in the battle at the front. If McLaren can combine strong qualifying with solid race pace, they could easily become one of the biggest threats this season. So after the first day of practice, the early picture of the 2026 season is starting to form. Ferrari looks dangerous in qualifying. Mercedes looks incredibly strong in race conditions. McLaren remains right in the mix. And Red Bull, as always, cannot be counted out. Meanwhile, Aston Martin is dealing with reliability concerns that could completely derail their weekend. If Ferrari manages to secure a front-row start, they could still control the race early. But if Mercedes' race pace advantage is real, the Silver Arrows may become extremely difficult to beat over a full Grand Prix distance. And with the brand-new energy deployment system still confusing teams and drivers alike, strategy decisions could become even more important than usual. So after just one day of running, the 2026 Formula One season already looks incredibly fascinating. New technology, new rivalries, and completely unpredictable performance differences between teams. But the biggest question remains unanswered. Who will actually take pole position in Melbourne, and who will win the very first race of the new era? Let me know your predictions in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to F1 Grid, because we'll be covering every major story from the 2026 Formula One season. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.